You are listening to Second Chance Ministry Radio.
Chronicles of the Kings of Israel and Judah. Timeline and list of the kings of Israel in order. Written by Chris Adkins. Narrated by Alan Caudle. Introduction. A warm welcome and thank you for your interest in this audiobook. If you are someone who wants to know the history of the kings of Israel and Judah, good and bad, the kings of Israel, northern and southern kingdoms, and the kings of Israel and Judah chart, then you are about to discover how to get the kings of Israel meaning right now. In fact, this audiobook gives you the answers to these important questions, including who is the first king of Israel, who is the last king of Israel, who is the youngest king of Israel, who was David, the king of Israel, who are the kings of Israel in chronological order, and much, much more. This book was created for you to give you insights into God's Word about the chronicles of the kings of Israel and Judah. We have tried to make available as much information about the timeline of the kings of Israel in order as possible. It was essential to start in the beginning, to truly understand and grasp the entire meaning of the life experience of Jesus, who paid the ultimate epic price for all of us. You will receive a much greater knowledge of Jesus and his blood covenant by studying the royal line of Jesus and the lineage of the kings of Israel. To the best of our knowledge, this study of the lineage is accurate. We hope you enjoy this audiobook. It's packed with information about the history of the kings of Israel and the kings of Israel meanings. You can learn in minutes what could take hours and hours to learn. Chapter 1. The United Kingdom of Israel. 3 kings. King Saul, whose name means asked of God. He was the first king of Israel, born in Gibeon of the tribe of Benjamin. He reigned 2 years, as we learn in 1 Samuel chapter 13, verse 1. BC 1096 to 1056 is recorded. We read of King Saul in several passages of the Bible. 1 Samuel chapter 10, verses 1 through 16. 1 Samuel chapter 11, verse 15. 1 Samuel chapter 31, verse 13. And in 1 Chronicles chapter 10, verses 1 through 14. King David, whose name means well-beloved. He was the second king of Israel, born in Bethlehem of the tribe of Judah. He reigned 40 years, as we learn in 2 Samuel chapter 5, verses 4 through 5. BC 1086 to 1016 is recorded. We can read more about King David in 2 Samuel chapter 2, verse 4, in 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 11, and in 1 Chronicles chapters 11 through 29. King Solomon, whose name means peace. He was the third king of Israel, born in Jerusalem of the tribe of Judah. He reigned 40 years, as we learn in 1 Kings chapter 11, verses 41 through 43. He was of Joseph's lineage, Matthew chapter 1, verses 6 through 16. BC 1033 through 975 is recorded. We can read more about King Solomon in such verses as 1 Kings chapter 1, verses 39, 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 12, 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 43, 1 Chronicles chapter 29, verses 22 through 25, and in 2 Chronicles chapters 1 through 9. Chapter 2. Explanation for the United Kingdom of Israel splitting into southern and northern kingdoms. In the time of King Solomon's reign, the Lord commanded the Israelites not to follow after other gods, and not to go into certain nations, neither to let those nations come in. But King Solomon sinned, and turned his heart away from the Lord in his old age, because he loved many of the women who were of those very nations. Solomon clung unto these in love, having 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines. His wives turned his heart from God and toward other gods. So Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord, and did not follow after the Lord, as David his father did. The Lord was angry with Solomon, which had appeared unto him twice, and had commanded him that he should not go after other gods. Solomon did not heed God's warnings, and he had forsaken God and worshipped other gods. Therefore the Lord rendered the kingdom from out of the hand of Solomon's son Rehoboam. However, God would not tear away all the kingdom for David's sake and for the sake of Jerusalem. So God gave one tribe to Rehoboam, so that David, God's servant, may always have a light before God in Jerusalem, the city where God had chosen out of all the tribes of Israel to put his name. Instead, the kingdom was given to his servant Jeroboam, consisting of 10 tribes. It came to pass, Solomon died, and his son Rehoboam reigned in his stead. Jeroboam and all the congregation came to King Rehoboam to make the heavy yoke which his father put on them lighter. Answer the people roughly, and hearken not unto the people, for the cause was from the Lord, that he might perform his saying, which the Lord spoke by Elijah the prophet unto Jeroboam. Therefore Israel rebelled against the house of David, and King Rehoboam fled Jerusalem. There was none that followed the house of David but the tribe of Judah only. King Rehoboam assembled all the house of Judah in Jerusalem with the tribe of Benjamin, which became known as the southern kingdom of Israel. And Israel sent and called Jeroboam unto the congregation, and made him king over all Israel, which became known as the northern kingdom of Israel. There was war between Rehoboam and Jeroboam all their days. 1 Kings, chapters 11 through 14. Chapter 3. The southern kingdom of Israel, the 20 kings of Judah, the royal line of Jesus. King Rehoboam, whose name means the people are enlarged. He was the first king of Judah. He reigned 17 years, as we learn in 1 Kings chapter 14, verse 21. BC 975 is recorded. We can read more of King Rehoboam in passages such as 1 Kings chapter 12, 11, and in 1 Kings chapter 12, 21 through 24, 1 Kings chapter 14, verses 29 through 31, and 2 Chronicles chapters 10 through 12. King Abijam, whose name means Jehovah is Father. He reigned 3 years, as we learn in 1 Kings chapter 15, verse 2. BC, unknown. He is mentioned in passages of the Bible such as 1 Kings chapter 15, verses 1 through 8, and 2 Chronicles chapter 13, verses 1 through 22. King Asa, whose name means physician. He reigned 41 years, according to 2 Chronicles chapter 16, verse 13. BC 914 is recorded. He is mentioned in biblical passages such as 1 Kings chapter 15, verses 9 through 24, 2 Chronicles chapter 14, verses 1 and 2, 2 Chronicles chapter 14, verse 1, 2 Chronicles chapter 15, verses 1 through 19, and 2 Chronicles chapter 16, verses 1 through 14. King Jehoshaphat, whose name means Jehovah has judged. He reigned 25 years, according to 1 Kings chapter 22, verse 42. BC 900 is recorded. He is mentioned in passages such as 1 Kings chapter 15, verse 24, 1 Kings chapter 22, verses 41 through 50, and 2 Chronicles chapters 17 through 20. King Jehoram, whose name means Jehovah is High. He reigned 8 years, according to 2 Kings chapter 8, verses 16 through 17. BC 893 through 885 is recorded. He is mentioned in 2 Kings chapter 8, verses 16 through 24, and 2 Chronicles chapter 21, verses 1 through 20. King Ahaziah, whose name means Jehovah has grasped. He succeeded his father Jehoram. He reigned 1 year, as we're told in 2 Chronicles chapter 22, verse 2. BC 884 is recorded. He is mentioned in 2 Kings chapter 8, verses 25 through 29, 2 Kings chapter 9, 27 through 28, and 2 Chronicles chapter 22, verses 1 through 9. King Athaliah, whose name means Jehovah is exalted. The mother of Ahaziah, meaning Queen reigns, usurped the throne for 6 years, mentioned in 2 Kings chapter 11, verse 3. BC 884 is recorded, mentioned in 2 Kings chapter 11, verses 1 through 21, 2 Chronicles chapter 22, verses 10 through 12, and 2 Chronicles chapter 23, verses 1 through 21. King Joash, whose name means Jehovah has given. He succeeded his father Ahaziah. He reigned 40 years, as we see in 2 Kings chapter 12, verse 1. BC 850 is recorded. He is mentioned in 2 Kings chapter 11, 1 through 3, 2 Kings chapter 11, verses 1 through 3, 2 Kings chapter 11, verse 21, 2 Kings chapter 12, verses 1 through 21, and 2 Chronicles chapter 24, verses 1 through 27. King Amaziah, whose name means Jehovah is strong. He succeeded his father Joash. He reigned 29 years, as mentioned in 2 Kings chapter 14, verse 2. BC 839 is recorded. He can be found in 2 Kings chapter 12, verse 21, 2 Kings chapter 14, verses 1 through 20, 1 Chronicles chapter 3, verse 12, and 2 Chronicles chapter 25, verses 1 through 28. King Azariah, whose name means Jehovah has helped. He succeeded his father and reigned for 52 years, as we read in 2 Kings chapter 15, verses 1 through 2. BC 809 is recorded. He is mentioned in 2 Kings chapter 14, verse 21, 2 Kings chapter 15, verses 1 through 26, 1 Chronicles chapter 3, verse 12, and 2 Chronicles chapter 26, verses 1 through 23. King Jotham, whose name means Jehovah is perfect. He succeeded his father Azariah and reigned for 16 years, as mentioned in 2 Kings chapter 15, verse 33. BC 750 is recorded. He can be found in 2 Kings chapter 15, verse 7, 2 Kings chapter 15, verses 32 through 38, 1 Chronicles chapter 3, verse 12, and 1 Chronicles chapter 27, verses 1 through 9. King Ahaz, whose name means he has grasped. He succeeded his father Jotham and reigned for 16 years, according to 2 Kings chapter 16, verses 1 through 2. BC 740 through 724 is recorded. He can be found in 2 Kings chapter 15, verse 38, 2 Kings chapter 16, verses 1 through 20, and 2 Chronicles chapter 28, verses 1 through 27. King Hezekiah, whose name means Jehovah strengthens. He succeeded his father Ahaz and reigned for 29 years, according to 2 Kings chapter 18, verse 2. BC 724 through 697, he can be found in 2 Kings chapter 16, verse 20, 2 Kings chapters 18 through 20, and 2 Chronicles chapters 29 through 32. King Manasseh, whose name means making to forget. He succeeded his father Hezekiah and reigned for 55 years, according to 2 Kings chapter 21, verse 1. BC 680 is recorded. He can be found in 2 Kings chapter 21, 1 through 18, 2 Chronicles chapter 32, verse 33, and 2 Chronicles chapter 33, verses 1 through 20. King Ammon, whose name means master workman. He reigned 2 years, according to 2 Kings chapter 21, verse 1. BC 643 is recorded. He can be found in 2 Kings chapter 21, verses 18 through 26, and 2 Chronicles chapter 33, verses 21 through 25. King Josiah, whose name means Jehovah heals. He succeeded his father Ammon, and reigned 31 years, according to 2 Kings chapter 22, verse 1. BC 642 through 611 is recorded. He can be found in 1 Kings chapter 13, verses 1 through 2, 2 Kings chapters 22 through 23, 2 Chronicles chapters 34 through 35, and Jeremiah chapter 22, verses 15 through 18. King Jehoahaz, whose name means Jehovah has taken hold. He succeeded his father Josiah, and reigned for 3 months, according to 2 Kings chapter 23, verse 31. He was deposed by Pharaoh Necho. BC 610 is recorded. He can be found in 2 Kings chapter 23, verses 30 through 34, 1 Chronicles chapter 3, verse 15, and 2 Chronicles chapter 36, verses 1 through 4. King Jehoiakim, whose name means Jehovah raises up. He was the son of King Josiah and brother of Jehoahaz, and succeeded his brother Jehoahaz. He reigned 11 years, according to 2 Chronicles chapter 36, verse 5. BC 610 through 600 is recorded. He can be found in 2 Kings chapter 23, verses 34 through 37, 2 Kings chapter 24, verses 1 through 7, 1 Chronicles chapter 3, verses 15 through 16, 2 Chronicles chapter 36, verses 1 through 8, Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 3, Jeremiah chapter 22, Jeremiah chapters 24 through 28, and Jeremiah chapters 35 through 37. King Jehoiakim, whose name means Jehovah established. He succeeded his father Jehoiakim. He was set on the throne by Nebuchadnezzar and reigned 3 months, according to 2 Kings chapter 24, verse 8. BC 600 is recorded. He can be found in 2 Kings chapter 24, verses 8 through 16, 2 Kings chapter 25, verses 27 through 30, 2 Chronicles chapter 36, verses 8 through 10, and Jeremiah chapter 52, verses 31 through 34. King Zedekiah, whose name means Jehovah is righteous, was the uncle and successor of Jehoiakim. He reigned 11 years, according to 2 Kings chapter 24, verse 18. BC 588 is recorded. He can be found in 2 Kings chapter 24, verses 17 through 20, 2 Kings chapter 25, verses 1 through 7, 2 Chronicles chapter 36, verses 11 through 13, Jeremiah chapter 34, verses 1 through 22, Jeremiah chapters 37 through 39, and Ezekiel chapter 17, verses 11 through 21. Chapter 4. The remaining 12 generations of the royal line of Jesus traced through Joseph's lineage, who were not kings. Salathiel, whose name means I have asked God. He was an ancestor of Jesus, as mentioned in Matthew chapter 1, verse 12. He was son of King Jeconiah, 1 Chronicles chapter 3:17. He begat a son, Zerubbabel, as mentioned in Matthew 1, verse 12. BC 580 is recorded. Zerubbabel, meaning seed of Babel. He was an ancestor of Jesus, as we find in Matthew chapter 1, verses 12 through 13, and a descendant of David, 1 Chronicles 3, verse 19. He was chosen by God as the one to renew his covenant to David's prophetic line, according to Haggai chapter 2, verses 20 through 23, and 2 Samuel chapter 7, verses 12 through 16. He was called by God to rebuild the temple according to Haggai chapter 1, 1 through 15. He does rebuild the temple, as we find in Zechariah chapter 4, verses 1 through 14. He was a leader of Jewish exiles, Nehemiah 7, verses 6 through 7. He restores worship in Jerusalem, Ezra chapter 3, verses 1 through 8. And he begat a son, Abiad, mentioned in Matthew chapter 1, verses 13. Abiad, whose name means the Father is Majesty. He was an ancestor of Jesus, as we find in Matthew chapter 1, verse 13. Eliakim, whose name means God will establish, an ancestor of Jesus, mentioned in Matthew chapter 1, verse 13. Azar, whose name means helper, another ancestor of Jesus, found in Matthew chapter 1, verse 14. Zadok, whose name means righteous, an ancestor of Jesus, Matthew chapter 1, 14. Achim, meaning woes, ancestor of Jesus, Matthew 1, verse 14. Eliad, meaning God is mighty, another ancestor of Jesus, found in Matthew 1, verse 15. Eleazar, meaning God has helped, an ancestor of Jesus, Matthew 1, verse 15. Mathan, whose name means gift, another ancestor of Jesus, found in Matthew 1, verse 15. Jacob, whose name means supplanter, an ancestor of Jesus, found in Matthew chapter 1, verses 15 through 16, and the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus, who was called Christ, Matthew chapter 1, 15 through 16. Joseph, meaning may he add, husband of Mary, Jesus' mother, Matthew chapter 1, 16, and he was with Mary at Jesus' birth, as we find in Luke chapter 2, verse 16. In Matthew chapter 1, verse 17, we're told, So all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations, and from David until the carrying away into Babylon are 14 generations, and from the carrying away into Babylon unto Christ are 14 generations. Chapter 5. The Northern Kingdom of Israel, the 19 Kings of Israel. Jeroboam, whose name means, May the people increase. He was the first king of the 10 tribes of Israel, and reigned for 22 years, as mentioned in 1 Kings chapter 14, verse 20. BC 970 is recorded. He can be found in 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 20, 1 Kings chapter 12, verses 25 through 33, 1 Kings chapter 13, 1 through 34, 1 Kings chapter 14, verses 1 through 20, and 2 Chronicles chapter 13, verse 20. Nadab, meaning willing and liberal. He succeeded his father Jeroboam and reigned for 2 years, as we're told in 1 Kings chapter 15, verse 25. BC 954 is recorded. He is mentioned in 1 Kings chapter 14, verse 20, and in 1 Kings chapter 15, verses 25 through 32. Baasha, meaning boldness. He was the son of Elijah of the house of Issachar. He gained the throne by murder, reigned for 24 years, according to 1 Kings 15, verse 33. BC 953 is recorded. He can be found in 1 Kings chapter 15, verses 16 through 34, 1 Kings chapter 16, verses 1 through 13, 2 Chronicles chapter 16, verses 1 through 6, and Jeremiah chapter 41, verse 9. Elah, meaning an oak. He succeeded his father Baasha. He reigned for 2 years, according to 1 Kings 16, verse 8. BC 930 is recorded. He can be found in 1 Kings chapter 16, verses 6 through 14. Zimri, whose name means pertaining to an antelope, and celebrated. He was a servant of Elah, and gained the throne by murder. He reigned 7 days, mentioned in 1 Kings chapter 16, verse 15. BC 929 is recorded. He can be found in 1 Kings chapter 16, verses 8 through 20, and 2 Kings chapter 9, verse 31. Omri, whose name means Jehovah apportions. All of Israel made Omri captain of the host, and the city was taken. He reigned for 12 years, as mentioned in 1 Kings chapter 16, verse 23. BC 929 through 907 is recorded. He can be found in 1 Kings chapter 16, 16 through 28, 2 Kings chapter 8, verse 26, 2 Chronicles chapter 22, verse 2, and Micah chapter 6, verse 16. Ahab, meaning father's brother. He succeeded his father Omri as 7th king and reigned for 22 years, as mentioned in 1 Kings chapter 16, verse 29. BC 919 through 897 is recorded. He can be found in 1 Kings chapters 16 through 22, 2 Kings chapters 8 through 10, 2 Chronicles chapter 18 verses 1 through 34, 2 Chronicles chapter 21 verses 6 through 13, 2 Chronicles chapter 22 verses 1 through 9, and Micah chapter 6 verse 16. Ahaziah, meaning Jehovah has grasped. He succeeded his father Ahab and reigned for 2 years, as mentioned in 1 Kings chapter 22 verse 51. BC 896 through 895 is recorded. He can be found in 1 Kings chapter 22 verses 40 through 53, 2 Kings chapter 1 verses 2 through 18, 1 Chronicles chapter 3 verse 11, and 2 Chronicles chapter 20 verses 35 through 37. Jehoram, meaning Jehovah is high. He was the son of Ahab, brother of Ahaziah, and reigned in his stead because Ahaziah had no son. He reigned for 12 years, according to 2 Kings chapter 3, verse 1. BC 896 through 884 is recorded. He can be found in 2 Kings chapter 1, verse 17, 2 Kings chapter 3, verses 1 through 27, 2 Kings chapter 5, 1 through 27, 2 Kings chapter 6, 8 through 23, 2 Kings chapter 8, verses 16 through 29, 2 Kings chapter 9, verses 14 through 29, and 2 Chronicles chapter 22, verses 5 through 7. Jehu, whose name means Jehovah is he. He was anointed by Elijah as king and reigned 28 years, according to 2 Kings chapter 10, verse 36. BC 884 through 856 is recorded. He can be found in 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 16 through 17, 2 Kings chapters 9 through 10, 2 Kings chapter 15, verse 12, 2 Chronicles chapter 22, verses 7 through 9, 2 Chronicles chapter 25, verse 17, and Hosea chapter 1, verse 4. Jehoahaz, meaning Jehovah has taken hold of. He succeeded his father Jehu, and reigned for 17 years, according to 2 Kings chapter 13, verse 1. BC 885 is recorded. He can be found in 2 Kings chapter 10, verse 35, and 2 Kings chapter 13, verses 1 through 9. Jehoash, whose name means Jehovah has given. He succeeded his father Jehoahaz, and reigned for 16 years, according to 2 Kings chapter 13, verse 10. BC 840 is recorded. He can be found in 2 Kings chapter 13, verses 9 through 25, and 2 Chronicles chapter 25, 17 through 25. Jeroboam II, whose name means, may the people increase. He succeeded his father Jehoash, and reigned for 41 years, according to 2 Kings chapter 14, verse 23. BC 825 is recorded. He can be found in 2 Kings chapter 13, verse 13, Kings chapter 14, verse 16, 2 Kings chapter 14, verses 23 through 29, 1 Chronicles chapter 5, verse 17, Amos chapter 1, verse 1, and Amos chapter 7, verses 9 through 11. Zechariah, meaning Jehovah remembers. He succeeded his father Jeroboam II and reigned 6 months, according to 2 Kings chapter 15, verse 8. BC 773 is recorded. He can be found in 2 Kings chapter 14, verse 29, and 2 Kings chapter 15, verses 8 through 12. Shalom, meaning recompense. He was the son of Jabesh, gained the throne by murder, and reigned 1 month, according to 2 Kings chapter 15, verse 13. BC 772 is recorded. He can be found in 2 Kings chapter 15, verses 10 through 15. Menachem, meaning comforter. He was the son of Gadi. He gained the throne by murder, and reigned 10 years, according to 2 Kings chapter 15, verse 17. BC 761 is recorded. He can be found in 2 Kings chapter 15, verses 14 through 22. Pekahiah, meaning Jehovah has opened. He succeeded his father Menachem, and reigned for 2 years, according to 2 Kings chapter 15, verse 23. BC 761 is recorded. He could be found in 2 Kings chapter 15, verses 22 through 26. Pekah, meaning opening of the eye. He was an officer of Pekahiah, son of Remaliah. He usurped Israel's throne and reigned 20 years, according to 2 Kings chapter 15, verse 27. BC 759 through 739 is recorded. He can be found in 2 Kings chapter 15, verses 25 through 31. Isaiah chapter 7, verses 1 through 9, 2 Kings chapter 16, 1 through 5, and 2 Chronicles chapter 28, verse 6. Hoshea, meaning to save, the 19th last and best king of Israel. He was the son of Elah. He usurped Israel's throne and reigned 9 years, according to 2 Kings verse 17, verse 1. BC 729 through 720 is recorded, and he can be found in 2 Kings verse 15, verse 30, 2 Kings chapter 17, verses 1 through 6, and 2 Kings chapter 18, verses 9 through 10.
Thank you for listening on Second Chance Ministry.